You're listening in on an animated discussion about the new Batman adventures with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, your superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from the Cinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Never Fear. Holy crap, I got goosebumps just thinking about the Scarecrow. Jeebies, this guy is creepy. This is terrifying. Can they do this on children's television? I mean, we've been talking about how very mixed the redesign has been for a long time, but this Scarecrow, oh my goodness. I saw this as a child and it terrified me, and as an adult, I get goosebumps.
It is, I think, the bar none best redesign of everybody. I don't think anybody got a better glow up than Scarecrow. Batgirl's very good, Robin's very good. There's some good stuff, but this redesign is amazing.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, because maybe it's because they set the bar low with the original Scarecrow design, which just looked kind of goofy. And I know that's true. That's supposed to be part of Scarecrow's thing, is he's goofy, but he's also supposed to be scary. Where the last guy, he just kind of looked like you wanted to punch him in the face. This guy, you're like, I don't even want to look at him. He gets goosebumps. And even the way I noticed the voice performance even was more like haunting and floaty.
Yeah.
Ooh, wow.
It's just like breathier, and he's just, and this is the way of all fear. I mean, it's very good. Like and I'm bundling that voice because I think it's the same voice actor, but he's definitely doing some different stuff, and it's really good. Now, I do think that there are some weird parts of the Scarecrow redesign that don't quite mesh with the Scarecrow gimmick, but the whole package still adds up to something that's, Scarecrow enough and really terrifying. So let me see what you think about my couple of snags here.
Sure.
They're not bad. They actually look really good, but they're maybe just not that Scarecrow-y. So the first one is the very wide-brimmed flat hat. Like, it's got a very sort of Puritan, I guess, feel to it. It kind of reminded me of the preacher from Poltergeist, or I guess more like from Poltergeist 2. He doesn't actually show up in Poltergeist, but and the other thing it made me think of, which was a little more Scarecrow tied in, is the children of the corn, like the adults, that are floating around the edges of the adults that would be looking after the children of the corn, I feel, would wear hats like this, buckles on their shoes and things like that.
Yes. I think the children of the corn influence is certainly there. And the thing that comes to mind for me here, and actually it would have been influenced probably more likely by this, or rather they were both influenced by Children of the Corn. I actually think of the 2002 movie Jeepers Creepers, in which the killer used a very similar hat. Now, obviously, this design came first, so I'm wondering if they weren't both sort of inspired by, again, the Puritan culture. I kind of like it, but it's because
I like it.
But it's definitely a choice. But it tended to work more for me than not. There's something creepy about that weird flat brimmed hat. It's just kind of ominous, maybe. Puritans are creepy. Can we just throw it out there? I mean,
I don't think they had to be, but we've certainly toyed with that between everything from Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane up through, Children of the Corn. And it does feel like it's an old hat you would have in the attic that you would put on a Scarecrow. So it works. It works. I do not dislike it. It just doesn't scream Scarecrow. And similarly to that, the hangman's noose around his neck is great as a visual, but a little confusing conceptually.
Yes. It looks scary. Do you think the Scarecrow just kind of you think Jonathan Crane just looked in his closet and he's like, what if I hung a rope around my neck? Would that scare the children? Would that scare the Batman?
Maybe.
It could have also been influenced by it's Hooded Justice a little bit. Watchmen had the noose around his neck.
Sure.
Which spoilers, no spoilers. The new series actually on HBO does some interesting stuff with that. But anyway, I don't know. Yeah, it seems kind of out of left field.
The last thing that isn't bad, again, it's just like an interesting thing, is that instead of his scythe, which we'd seen a few times before, we just kind of get this rough-hewn stick. And it kind of goes with this more rustic sort of Scarecrow look that he's got going on in this outfit. But it also made me wonder if maybe metatextually standards and practices were finally like, okay, listen, we've given a lot. Fix the scythe.
It's that's interesting because they also have guns that look like bona fide guns in this episode, close-ups of guns in this episode. So if that's the case, that's kind of weird. But the 90s censors were very strange. I don't fully understand them.
Well, and BTAS from Jump, so of course also into these shows also, kind of thumbed their nose at standards and practices as much as they could, right? We've had Tommy guns on screen, and we've mentioned before that every gun on the X-Men series and the Spider-Man series that were concurrently running were laser guns, very obviously. Heck, when I was a very young kid with G.I. Joe, those were all laser guns. But Batman has just been like, nope, real guns. And I wonder if, like I say, this is the place where S&P were just like, this far, no further, no more scythe.
Right.
What's he doing with it? I don't know. It's the best guess I have, because the scythe would have actually worked with this outfit even better than it worked with the previous outfit.
I mean, you definitely think about the Grim Reaper. I mean, I think you basically would have a scary Grim Reaper with the scythe, whereas now, he looks a little more Scarecrow-like.
So that's all I've got for Scarecrow. He's amazing. I don't think we'll see his like again as far as the improvement factor from pre-redesign to post-redesign. He's great.
Yes, absolutely. He's great.
So we don't have a lot of other new characters. And in fact, one of the two new characters that I want to talk about is really just another identity for Bruce Wayne. Ladies and gentlemen, Matches Malone. Here he is.
I love Matches Malone. I want a spinoff with Matches Malone, Joshua. Where is it? I love that mustache.
Let me tell you where it is. It is in at least one episode of Batman the Brave and the Bold, where Batman is amnesiac and believes that he is Matches Malone. Like, he goes undercover, gets conked in the melon, forgets that he's Bruce Wayne and Batman, and the birds of prey have to come in and basically rescue him from himself, because he thinks he's Matches Malone. So that 22 minutes is probably the closest you're getting. And I highly recommend that episode, especially if you can find it with the musical number that had to be censored later.
Interesting. Matches Malone,
anyway.
He's very, very edgy, apparently, Matches Malone. I found this entire disguise to be kind of hilarious. And I also found it funny that he committed. Even after he got captured, he was committed. And thirdly, this disguise is kind of obvious, so I'm sort of surprised that Scarecrow didn't recognize it was Bruce Wayne. I mean, he had a stash and his voice was different, but I mean, it's kind of obvious. I thought it was funny, personally.
So comic book wise, Batman has been dressing up as Matches Malone when he needed to make contact with the underworld for decades. I mean, since the 70s. Easily, right? Mm-hmm. And there really isn't much to the disguise other than the mustache, the sunglasses, the match, and the accent, right? But the clothes and the context really matter, I think, right? Like, no one is expecting to see Bruce Wayne in, a thuggish outfit and playing dice on the corner and stuff like that. I think you can get past the resemblance with Bruce Wayne based on context. But in this case, these guys were super lazy because they just left him in Bruce Wayne's suit, like just in his business suit. And I don't know internally whether Scarecrow would have noticed, but since we're taking a look at these redesigns, it's just about the laziest approach to Matches Malone I've ever seen, which makes me sad because I really kind of love the whole idea of Matches Malone.
So just Matches Malone, he doesn't show up in BTAS again, right?
Oh, you know what? I don't think so. We should keep an eye out to see if they do a better job with him from here on out. In BTAS, whenever Bruce Wayne went undercover on the street, he just looked like himself, but 5 o'clock shadow and shabbier clothes, stuff like that, like in The Forgotten. So that would have been a good place to use Matches Malone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I will say, one part, this is sort of like adjacent to matches. The disheveled Bruce Wayne that we get after he beats the alligators is chef kiss. I really like it. Mussed hair, untucked shirt, loose tie. And when he comes stalking into Wayne Manor like that, I'm like, that is good. I don't like how we got here, but I like where we got to.
It was kind of funny. By the way, spoilers for later in this conversation, that was definitely a super, even though he wasn't in costume, that was a very, very because he's Batman moment. While intoxicated by a gas, he takes out 2 alligators.
Okay, now hold on. Let's remember that once upon a time, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but it's fine. Once upon a time, he fought sewer alligators, giant sewer alligators in his right mind and won. So a Batman with no fear taking out more alligators, I have no problem with this. No sweat.
I just think that the first time he did it because he's Batman, and now he's doing it again because he's Batman. But Bruce Wayne without fear. I'll buy it. I'll buy it just enough. But 2 alligators at one time.
I know. I think that also we were unsure whether he killed the alligators in the Underdwellers. But in this case, it's pretty obvious he definitely killed them. And I think that's the difference. Yeah. But I think that's the difference between Batman with fear or whatever. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. But, a normal Batman and a Batman under the effects of this gas. I think that's the difference. It's like incapacitate the animals that don't know any better before the gas. After the gas, it's like murderous rage.
All right, Joshua. So one other thing I want to note on before we get to the Batwing, which I know we've got thoughts on that, is just that something I've noticed about both Superman the Animated Series and Batman the Animated Series is the way they introduce these one-off cronies who have just enough characteristics and a distinct visual style for you to say, that's a new character, but then they never show up again.
It's very weird considering how little effort goes into things like Matches Malone or Casual Clark Kent, that they would take the time to make these very distinctive henchmen or like lieutenants that then vanish. It's weird, but I kind of appreciate the effort.
I do appreciate the effort, and I have to highlight this episode's crony of the week, Guru. I know, very, very original naming. Guru, an associate of Scarecrow. Now he's the guy with the white coat and the white tie and the weird the pompadour-esque hair. Yeah. I just wanted to say I thought he was a great addition to the episode. And then he disappears about 10 minutes in, and we never see from him again ever. In the Batman the Animated Series.
I do like that self-help, which I think is 99% a scam in the real world, is just folded into this guy as part of the bigger scam / Scarecrow plot. I'm a big fan of that intertextuality there. It's good.
It's a great way to make some money. Hey, I'm going to work with the Scarecrow to generate a very scared city, and then I will sell them all self-help books about how to conquer their fear. That's pretty clever. Pretty clever. And also a good way to keep yourself from being directly tied to the Scarecrow.
Self-help as cover for supervillain scheme. I'm just going to put that in my back pocket. I feel like I'm going to use that in something in the future. And now, the Batwing.
Yes, the Batwing.
Boy, it sure is just okay.
I like the word, Joshua, passable. It's right. Solid. It's passable. It looks like a Batwing.
I don't think it does. I think it looks like a black fighter jet. I really think it's lost all of the distinctive features that would set it apart as guaranteed 100% the Batwing.
I think it looks like, I didn't say, hold on, just to clarify, I didn't say it looked like the Batwing. I said it looked like a Batwing.
I like it. I like that. Like, this is my beater. This is my backup Batwing when the other one's in the shop.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever I don't need to be as flashy, I just need to get around and don't want to, take the other one out of the garage. I take this guy. I mean, if you were Bruce Wayne, wouldn't you have a whole garage full of Batwings? right?
I absolutely would, but I wouldn't let any one of them look as boring as this.
Yeah.
I can't hate it. I can't hate it because it does the job. Like, it's not terrible, but it's just such a big step backwards from the BTAS Batwing that I'm just mystified by this choice. Just mystified.
Yeah. It just is one of those things. I think it's one of those, they tried to simplify it. And by simplifying it, it lost all the detail that made it stand out. And when you do that, it just looks kind of generic.
I mean, we've seen that problem with the Batmobile a little bit. Like, we don't hate it, but it's not what we would have preferred compared to the previous show.
Right.
I think really so far, the Batboat is the only thing that comes out of the redesign looking at least as cool, if not cooler. I think a lot of the rest of the gear just really suffers.
Yeah, it just in the streamline, I'm noticing things are a lot pointier and less detailed. So I feel like the
You're not wrong.
I feel like the pointiness is an attempt to make it stand out due to the lack of detail. I don't know. But
no, you're not wrong. That is kind of the sum up for all the gear. It's much pointier but less detailed. And in rare instances, that works, like with the grapple gun, as we talked about. But most of the time, it just falls a little flat.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly can't remember. I think we get a new, better Batwing when we get to Batman Beyond. But I think Justice League, I think there's a better Batwing too, I believe.
I think it's basically this one, but we'll see when we get there.
We'll see. I don't recall specifically, but we'll get there. We'll get there one day. Yeah.
So looking at the episode as a whole, I think that there is some really strong thematic stuff going on here that maybe doesn't land like as hard as I would like it to. This idea of what it's like to have the lack of fear is an absolutely brilliant inversion of Scarecrow's usual deal.
Yes, I think this is thematically a terrific episode. And here's the thing. I think the premise is extremely strong. I know on the surface, it could be argued that they didn't push it far enough in terms of like what Batman does and doesn't do from like a Daredevil type standpoint.
Sure, yeah.
But I do really, really like if they were choosing between honing in on psychology versus honing in on like dumb Daredevil-ish stunts, I like they actually leaned into the psychology far more. We touch on, from Batman's perspective, his biggest fear is apparently killing criminals and hurting his family or partners, and it could be physically or emotionally. I think that's there. I think because he the way he talks to Tim when he's under the gas is pretty abusive.
Oh, it's bad. Yes, it's very bad. That's actually, we're going to get to it, but there is some stuff mixed up in there that I think is legitimately wrong and bad about the way this episode plays out. Not so much the middle bit, but the end bit. But I don't want to leave behind this lack of fear yet, so we'll get there.
Well, and you see, I like, it's, again, synthesis sort of stated by the character that Batman saves in the opening, which again, I actually thought the opening of this episode was excellent. You got this dude swinging around, no context, and he's laughing, so you're like, oh my gosh, is this a Joker plot? Like, what's going on?
Right.
And there's a little bit of mystery there, but one thing he says that really stood out was, fear is a prison, you see, and I've just broken out. So that's kind of like the thesis of the episode, and the episode really delves into that and what that means and how that's not necessarily a good thing. And then of course they kind of tie it back together at the end when they say, oh, a little bit of fear is not a bad thing. But anyway, I thought that was thematically very strong.
Yes, it really is. It really is. And in fact, the part that I think doesn't land quite as well as I would like to for me is that I can't actually decide what this episode thinks an absence of fear should look like. Like, it starts out with this kind of like, as you say, Daredevil, kind of just like taking really foolish risks, which is where we start with Batman also. But when Scarecrow is ransoming the city, what he's saying is, do you want to see a city with no fear, like a city with no inhibitions? That's really what I was hearing, because he was talking about fear is a glue that holds society together. And I was like, I agree with that. Right. I think that's way more interesting. The guy who comes in and yells at Bruce Wayne's CEO and plants one on the lips of his assistant is a lot more what I think fearlessness would look like in Gotham City than like Daredevil dumb stuff, And I'm also a little worried about a lack of fear being the reason that Batman's putting people in danger of dying, right? Like, I don't actually, speaking for myself, I don't actually think that I'm afraid that I'd become a killer. I think I'm a decent person that doesn't want to murder people. And this is maybe a little more on my mind right now because on my Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, Listen Up A-Holes, we have talked a lot very recently about body count in both Civil War and in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and what it means to be a superhero who doesn't murder in Spider-Man Homecoming, right? Like, you have this pure cinnamon roll of a kid who would never think to kill anybody, whose mentor is an abusive mass murderer, hi Tony Stark. So I don't know how much I love that it's fear that keeps Batman from killing people as much as it's just decency, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to dissect there, and that's going to be some of the gray area. I do think that, you know, as Batman, maybe, and again, that's the thing, you have to really get into the psychology and think through how you view Batman and what you think about. But maybe you could say his fear is, you know, as a vigilante, afraid that he's going to go too far. And one way of one way that manifests itself is by, like, just letting some dude he just interrogated die. So
no,
I don't think it's a stretch. Now, I see where you're coming from. I don't think you're wrong, but I think this is like one of those gray areas because I don't think it's a stretch for Bruce Wayne, one of his fears, to be that he goes too far on accident, or a fear that he becomes careless and sloppy.
Now, the carelessness, I believe, right? But that kind of manifests itself in these daredevil flying maneuvers in the Batwing, which again is kind of like it's there, but it's not quite there. And also, his interrogation of that gangster is not significantly different from his usual interrogation techniques, honestly. It really isn't.
Right. But
it's a little different, and the difference is fundamental and serious, but it's so close to his usual MO that I want it to draw a more stark line as to what does Batman fear and what does stepping over that look like. For instance, when you bring up him being abusive and manipulative to his family, now that I would believe as a real fear, except it's kind of undermined both in this episode and in New Batman Adventures as a whole. He's not a good dude to his family in this iteration of the show. And the idea that that's one of his primary fears, but he's constantly succumbing to it, it's not quite as stark a relief between the two as I would like to see in this otherwise really smart episode, you know?
Sure. I think that's... Again, I think there's a lot of gray area here, but I don't think you're wrong. Because, you know, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, he is tough love dad who is sometimes emotionally abusive in this show, intentionally or not intentionally, depending on what the episode it looks like. But, you know, so I see what you're saying. There's not enough difference between what he normally does and what we see him do, but he takes everything a step further. Is what I mean.
It's
like
true.
He's, you know, like trying to emotionally manipulate Tim into doing something, and then yelling at him. And this is children's television, so they can't say swear words. But there was one point I was like, oh, he's about to call this kid a name that he wouldn't normally call him when he doesn't.
Right, yeah.
When Tim, you know, when Robin doesn't succumb. But I see what you're saying. The line's a little blurrier than I think we would both like, and maybe they should have. Honestly, maybe they should have taken all of that stuff we just talked about that he does a step further to make it that much more stark a difference.
That is what I'm saying. It's not that I think this is poor characterization for Batman. It's that I think they kind of missed an opportunity to really look at what Batman Without Fear, you know, would be like in terms of whatever the themes of this episode and this series as a whole are. And I think that they do fine, but they don't do great. And I think that's my frustration, is that I really like that there is both a practical and a philosophical conversation going on around Scarecrow's plot.
Right.
You know, I like that a lot. I just wish that the episode itself had addressed it a little more specifically, like a little more obviously.
Right.
Which I think also leads us to a conversation about how Bat Dad is legit abusive in this episode. Like, no two ways about it. He is an abuser as far as Tim is concerned in this 22 minutes.
Hey, I mean, yeah, but I mean, that's what I'm saying. I think he does go further than he would normally go with the the things he says and does. So that's why I would say the fear gas does influence him enough for me to say, okay, well, he wouldn't normally do that to Robin or say that to Robin. So, I mean, he does things like that, but not to that extent.
I agree with you 100%, and it's actually the end of the show that frustrates me. The last conversation between Batman and Robin is what frustrates me on this point. First of all, Tim, a child, apologizes for doing the right thing. That's great characterization. I like that a lot.
Right.
Batman says, don't apologize. That's also great characterization. Saying, you did the right thing. You took me out and you should have. It's actually very impressive for Tim, which we'll talk about more here in a minute. I really like Tim in this episode and the trajectory this puts him on. But then Batman goes on to fail in his own apology. He owes Tim a real apology. And even if it hadn't occurred to him beforehand, at the point that Tim is apologizing for doing the right thing, that should have sparked his brain and he should have gone, I really owe this kid an apology for all the wrong things I did. And he never apologizes. And that is bad parenting. That is not good.
Again, I'm not going to weigh in as a non-parent. I'm not going to weigh in with my parenting philosophy, but one could make the argument. I'm not sure I do either, but one could make the argument that he doesn't feel like he needs to apologize because he was under the influence of the fear gas, which theoretically could be Scarecrow's fault. Now, that's reading into it a little bit, and I don't really have a strong opinion either way on whether he owed him an apology or not, but I see what you're saying. Good parenting.
No, I like that. I like that.
Even at good parenting, I would say, again, I'm not an expert in any capacity, but yeah, even if it's not totally your fault, he did fail him to some capacity. I guess it's all up to like how much did Tim understand how much was Batman versus how much was the fear gas or the non-fear gas.
Non-fear gas? No, I agree with you. And actually in universes where mind control or weaponized mind-altering substances and hypnotism, like where all that stuff is very powerful, it's a real worthwhile question. How responsible am I for my actions when I am under the influence of that stuff? This is a question that comes up a lot. I find myself in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel the series conversations a lot where that's a huge deal because it happens all the time. But it's a big superhero thing too, right? Like at one point, the Justice League kicked Batman out because he had plans to take out all of his superpowered teammates. This happened literally right after a storyline where all of them had their minds controlled and they did a bunch of destructive stuff. And I was like, you're maybe not taking seriously, like you're not responsible for that destruction. You were under mind control, right? But you're not taking seriously the threat that you are when you're under mind control.
Right. And also, I would argue Batman doesn't owe them an apology because he just saw them wreak havoc. So he's like, listen, dude, I got to be prepared if you guys do that again.
Yes. That's exactly my point. So I love that conversation. I do think there's a real conversation for how responsible is Batman for his actions while under the influence. But let's also be honest. You did that dirt and you owe that kid an apology. And I can speak from my perspective as both son and father that when the parent does wrong, you model the right behavior by apologizing. And again, I wouldn't even notice maybe if it weren't for the fact that Tim is literally apologizing for things he did not do wrong.
Right. And again, I think Batman saying, no, you don't owe me an apology is good.
It's a half measure. It's halfway there.
Well, and I guess, again, I just think, I mean, it didn't bother me at all, either, I'll be honest, but, it's just one of those that the episode needed to wrap up, so they didn't want to take the time to have that conversation because they were probably about out of time. But, I mean, I see where
all he had to do was say, I'm sorry. All he had to do was say, I'm sorry.
I see where you're coming from, but also, I just think, I don't feel strongly one way or another, but I feel like maybe, this is all hyper speculation, but I could easily see from a writer's perspective, it's like, well, he doesn't really owe an apology because of the fear gas stuff. But, hey, that's subjective. I don't feel strongly one way or another, to be honest, so.
Worse, I think that they're playing hard into their Bruce is always vaguely abusive and manipulative. That is going to continue to be a thing throughout the new Batman adventures. I'm afraid of that. Now, here's the good news of a change in the new Batman adventures. How much do we love Tim Drake in this episode?
Yeah, he's great. He takes control of the situation. He calls Batman on his BS. Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think this is a great episode for Tim Drake Robin.
I think this really sets Tim apart from Dick also, because I don't know that we even see this level of maturity when it comes to drawing a line with Batman. I don't think we even see that level in Nightwing most of the time. Like, this is Tim really doing great work here.
Not only would Dick not apologize, Dick would also make the statement, hey, you owe me an apology, Batman, at the end of the episode. And at least that's how I see that conversation going down, to kind of paint the difference between the relationship between Batman and Tim and Batman and Dick.
I think that's really interesting. I think you're right. I think Dick would have a hard time going as hard against Batman as Tim does in this episode. But at the end, he would have the sense of self to demand the apology that he is due, whereas Tim is a little, I don't know, he's like a boy of action. He knew the right thing to do, but he's not strong enough in his own sense of self to get the apology he deserves at the end. That's a really good contrast between them. That's exciting. I'm things to keep an eye on in the future.
Yeah, I'm just going to press back a little bit, and I'm not like making a strong statement. I'm just saying I think it's worth leaving the question open. Does Batman actually owe an apology? Because mind control shenanigans, all the like the way it alters the person known. I mean, listen, I'm a guy who apologizes a lot, so I'm not saying that's not a thing to do. But I feel like if you're gonna be really critical, like if Dick had come, say for instance, it was Dick in this episode, and he demanded an apology. I would be like, Batman, just be like, man, it was the fear gas, and then roll on. I don't know. It's tricky. But,
if it's worth me saying, like putting the final nail into this, why I disagree. If it were mind control, 100%, he's not responsible, right? Like at all. He's not in his own mind. And we will see some actual mind control episodes in Justice League, if not here in New Batman Adventures. He would not be responsible for it. But this is him still mostly himself, right? Like what we are seeing is a look behind his psychological curtain, which means you gotta own that jazz. And, maybe that is me as a dad talking, but which is not to play a card and say, so you can't have an opinion, Caleb. But I'm not going to lie. Probably my own parenting situation is definitely informing my feelings on this.
You're way more informed. And in the role of parenting, you are infinitely more informed than me. So I have no strong opinion. I'm like, I could see this going both ways. But, I think that's something to consider from your.
I think all of us can remember a time when our parent was 100% in the wrong when we were children, and they never apologized to us. I know that I can name at least two of those instances in my life because they stick with you,
Yeah.
And so anyway, it's a thing. So let's ask real quick before we move on to our alternate media recommendations. Let's take a look at the moral of the story and ask if we agree. A little bit of fear is a good thing. Caleb, what do you think? Do you agree with that moral?
That is a little too simplified for me to say it's right or wrong. That could be taken in so many different directions that I think is potentially, when taken to the extreme, could do a lot of damage. So I think that when you're talking about fear in the sense of like respect, and this is not like an authoritarian thing I want to play into, but I do feel like you fear heights because you respect gravity, right? You respect that gravity could kill you.
Yeah. You're parsing the difference between respect and fear, and I think that's wise. That is wise, yes.
Yeah, so I think that there is a bit of fear that comes with that sort of respect, but it's not respect out of, oh my gosh, I'm afraid to do anything because of what could happen. It's more like, I know as a sane human that this action will lead to consequences that will either harm myself or others, and I am afraid of those consequences in that light, so I will not do that. So it's a respect for how things work. That doesn't mean you need to live in fear of those things. So I guess a little bit to that point, yeah, sure, a little bit of fear is fine. But also I could super see like all sorts of terrible, evil people saying the same thing to justify their actions. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I like that. So
now it's so nuanced, right? It's so nuanced because I agree with you from the practical. Like I mentioned, there's a real practical versus psychological kind of conversation here. From the practical, I agree with you. It's more like I respect the fact that chainsaw can take my hand off.
Yes, correct.
But in terms of what Scarecrow actually says about Gotham City, we're actually kind of more talking about the psychological than the practical. Do you want to see a society where no one fears shame? Where, like, take your guy who came in and yelled at Bruce Wayne. Like, the main reason he had not done that up until then is because he was afraid of the consequences.
Right.
And now he's no longer afraid of the consequences. Well, guess what? Those are consequences you should be legitimately afraid of.
Correct.
And especially talking about society in the year of our Lord 2020 in America, I want people who fear shame in my life, like in my leadership, in my friends and family. Like, you should worry how other people see you so that maybe you will be less of a bigot or a racist or a sexist or just less mean.
Or just be more decent, or just be decent.
Just be decent. I would like people to be decent because they want to be decent, but I will accept people being decent because they're afraid of how they'll be ostracized or shamed if they aren't. And I mean, I do think that that is where society is kind of harnessing what we would broadly call a negative thing and turning it into a positive thing. Because what else are you going to do? How else are you going to enforce these basic rules of human interaction, you know?
Right. Well, again, that's the social norms. And listen, fear is a motivator for sure. There are fear-driven governments. There are fear-driven organizations that are very effective at what they do. So it is not that fear is not effective. And so in a certain light, I think Scarecrow's thesis is correct. It is a glue that holds us together. If you're living in a country where you want to survive, and you know that there are very dire consequences if you step out of line. Thinking about, I guess a tip of my hat a little bit, but like a recent movie that came out, Jojo Rabbit, you know, how there are a lot of decent people living in Nazi Germany who feared consequences of being sought out. So they kind of fell in line, at least publicly, fell in line with, the Nazi Germany slogans and all that stuff, right? So and obviously up to a certain point, Nazi Germany was effective until they were, they crumbled at in the war. But I'm just saying, like, fear is a way to motivate and control people. There is no doubt about it. And yes, it is serve as a glue that can bring people together in a certain light as well. I'm not saying that's always a good thing either.
I don't think it's always a good. I agree. That's the nuance and the fun part of the conversation is I think that both of us can say we agree with that moral, but we need to be in the weeds about it. You know?
It's really a case by case scenario. That's what Yes. Like, it's not like a little bit of fear is a good thing all the time. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. A little bit of bravery is a good thing. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Yes.
So it's complicated.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. How do we feel about this moral? It's complicated. You know what? Then it's probably a good and useful moral. I like that a lot.
There you go. Morality is complicated sometimes. I think that is a great way to put a pin in the conversation. Joshua, do we want to close out with some alternate media recommendations today?
Absolutely. Tell me, Caleb, if people love Never Fear or want to have more of the conversations about some of the aspects and themes that we've brought up, what do you think they should watch, read, listen to, whatever?
All right, so I have to throw out there a movie that I like quite a lot. I believe it came out, I want to say 2015, mid-2010s, called The Babadook. Great horror movie, very psychological, very, very psychological. It delves into psychological trauma and psychological fear in a very sophisticated way, but it also uses imagery that is very similar to what you would see from the Scarecrow in this episode, a type of manifestation of a lot of these psychological traumas and psychological fears are this thing called The Babadook. I don't want to spoil it more than that, but it is a very intensely creepy movie, very creepy atmosphere, but it also deals with the psychological side of it. There's a lot of meat on the bones dealing with like mental illnesses in a way that I find to be interesting. So I would highly recommend The Babadook. Joshua, how about you?
So I'm going to look at the kind of father-son, theme a little closer here. As you can tell, that one really stuck in my craw. So I'm going to recommend Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now, I am sure that I have recommended this previously, but there's a very specific reason here. And let me start with, there is a lot of extremely problematic stuff in the very concept of Indiana Jones across all movies and times and whatever. Like, don't get me wrong, despoiling other cultures, all kinds of stuff. Very bad. Not necessarily a role model in every way. But one thing that I have always appreciated, I mean, since I was a child, is the father-son relationship that we see in Temple of Doom between Indy and Short Round. And why this stuck out for me so much in this particular episode is because Indy does get mind controlled.
Yes,
like
he does.
Full-bore mind controlled.
Yeah.
And he is very mean and abusive to Short Round in a way that really breaks Short Round's heart. Like, you can tell by watching that this is not how it needs to be. And then Short Round steps up very similarly to the way Tim does, and he makes this thing happen. He makes it work out so that Indy comes out from under the mind control. And they apologize to one another. But you can also kind of see, like, Indy feels this more deeply. Like, it's a wordless apology, but man, they are just in each other's feelings in a way that I would have preferred to see Batman and Robin in each other's feelings. So that's my recommendation, Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom. That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb is at CMastersTalk, and I am at Joshua Unruh. And the hashtag is Animated Discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
I am the editor-in-chief and a contributor at thecinematropolis.com, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique and analysis. We also have a podcast called The Cinematic Schematic, and you can find all those articles and podcasts at thecinematropolis.com, or on the podcast. You can find it wherever your podcasts are found.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
The links to the Patreon, Apple Podcast, our recommendations, and Twitter are easy to find in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us for this animated discussion. We'll be back next time to talk about Superman the Animated Series, episode My Girl.
We'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.